My guest today is Nancy Poznoff, co-founder of Kingston Marketing Group. Nancy cut her teeth as a marketing leader at Starbucks, T-Mobile, and Zillow, and we hit on some very interesting topics in this episode, such as building an agency from scratch. And I learned a few things, such as at Starbucks, at the beginning of most marketing meetings, they would read a customer email. If you want to be customer centric, no matter who the customer is, I think this is the episode for you. Also, if you like this, stop right now and rate us 5 stars. Thank you. I'll just jump right in. You have been a marketing executive at a bunch of industry leaders here in Seattle. There's Zillow, Starbucks, T-Mobile. What made you decide to take the plunge from corporate life into starting your own agency?
Yeah, well, it was not a quick overnight easy process. After about 15, 17 probably years in corporate roles, I was tired, right? It's it's a serious sport to be a VP in a Fortune 500 company, especially in a marketing role. And I was at Starbucks contemplating my next move, thinking I would just take some time to reset. Before doing that was was cool. Everybody's doing it now. And Zillow called, and I ended up, getting really excited about that opportunity to do something completely different, and made the move over there. And after about 2 years at Zillow, they were going through a pretty significant leadership shuffle, a big strategic shift. And typically, throughout my career, when we made a big strategy change, I was really energized and motivated and excited to lead my team through that. So I get bored easily, right? I was one of those people that was always really energized by change. And when we were, kind of teeing up for our team, how things were going to be changing with Zillow, I just wasn't feeling it. And that was a huge signal to me that, I didn't take a break between roles, that I was just probably burned out, because typically I would have been like day one in Rich Barton's office, like, here's 50 ideas, here's all the things I want to do with my team, here's, how we're going to like fuel this change. And I just was like, no, I don't want to do it. And I got to talking with my now business partner, Katie, who was also in leadership there. And I was like, I'm thinking I need to just make a change. And I've got a ton of experience, and I've always loved being in a strategic role. I'm thinking about consulting. And she said, oh my gosh, me too. And we actually were over in Kingston, Washington, having a cup of coffee. And that is where our business was born. So we were able to very quickly tap into our network. We actually had a client lined up before I had scrambled to get a business license and get a bank account and get things rolling. And here we are coming up on our 3-year anniversary. So it's all happened kind of overnight and just fell into place.
Wow, congrats for that. You characterized being a corporate VP as busy, but I don't get the sense that agency life is exactly unbusy. I'm curious, as you've thought back around the last 3 years, as you've been building your agency, what things have gone right? And then not that you'd want to do a do-over, but what advice would you give to folks who are thinking about embarking on this journey themselves?
Yeah. I think the things that have gone right, it's really all boils down to the people. So who I went into business with, Katie's a phenomenal partner. We had a very clear and aligned strategic vision for what we wanted to build from day one. We sat down, we did all the things that we, want our clients to do. We built out our core values, we built out our mission, what we wanted that brand to be. So I think we were really well aligned out of the gates. What kind of clients do we want to have? What kind of clients do we not want to have, right? We had all those conversations. And then, the business just came. We were extremely fortunate that, our network kind of provided in those early days. People heard we were going out on our own and started calling. And the other thing that went really well is our network also provided us with a ton of talent to tap into. So we were able to quickly scale and hire in order to meet the demand by bringing in people we worked with and that we trusted, which really helped propel us. And then, of course, the flywheel's created. We've got this network effect. We've got really strong people. And then, we started to do really great work. And that resulted in then customer referrals and repeat business. And so it all just kind of started firing. There was this little tiny hiccup that is called a global pandemic, right? So that happened about 6 months into our journey. So we were really, feeling good. We had like 4 people, we're rocking and rolling. And then the pandemic hit. And, I think we just were fortunate that we were, cash flow positive. We were very level headed. We only had a couple employees, a couple mouths to feed. And we actually saw kind of a moment, like a week of just silence. Everyone was trying to regroup and figure out what to do. And then our business took off because, we do marketing and communications. And so a lot of marketers didn't really know what to do and needed some counsel. And then a lot of companies, their comms teams were already at capacity to figure out, how to navigate this completely unprecedented world. They needed help. So we got really, really busy really quickly. So that was kind of a hiccup and a help at the end of the day. We got a lot of business through the pandemic and built some really close relationships with our clients through that tumultuous time. So, in terms of do-overs, I feel like we've been really, really lucky. We've been on a bit of a tear. I think we may have scaled a little faster than maybe in hindsight than we should have, but we continue to see, really strong business and demand for our type of service. So I think we've served probably over 50 clients at this point, and we've got a really great roster of companies from, very small early stage startups all the way through, IPO or just post IPO. And so it's been a whirlwind. I think, the thing that I love most about it is, you talked about being really busy as a corporate VP. And we are busy, but there's something different when you are at the helm and you own your time and you own the strategy. And that's what's been really liberating for me is, when I was in a corporate role, I'd walk in every morning. I had an admin who would come tell me, your day just blew up. Here's your new calendar. You're in meetings from 7:30 to 6 today. Like, what do you want for lunch? So to go from that to, okay, every meeting on my calendar today, I probably scheduled and I have the, the reins here. It just feels very different. And for me, much more motivating in terms of the work. So the time and time doesn't mean anything anymore, I feel like, in this post-COVID world, but
Right.
having that sense of agency again has been really empowering for me.
That's very cool. Very motivating. I wonder if Zoom and virtual meetings has also been a boon. I can think a little bit about my experience with agencies because they're never in the same building. And so everything was done over the phone or over conference call. And as I've gotten to work with vendors and coworkers and everybody that's not exactly where I am, it's actually been a really big help. Have you found the same thing?
Absolutely. Yes. We started out as a remote agency. We did have an office space, but we were only in a couple days a week. So from the get-go, we were doing a lot of business over Zoom. So when that became the norm, over the last couple of years, it felt really natural to us. I think the transition was we do a lot of workshopping and kind of power sessions with our clients. And so taking those from a physical space to a virtual space took a couple revs, right? It took some practice. What we did in a 6-hour in-person session, like you can't do a 6-hour Zoom. It's just not going to work. So you have to kind of rethink how to structure those sessions and keep that momentum going in that space. But it's worked really well. And it's funny because at first I was super resistant. I hated video conferencing. I found it really distracting. And but now it's just the way everybody works, and I really enjoy it. So it's worked out quite well. And we're starting to see people in person again, and now we're adjusting back to that. And I have many clients and even employees who I've never met in person, which is a little bit mind-blowing to me.
It's been fun. I'm in the same situation. I saw folks in the office where it didn't register immediately if I was seeing them in 3D for the first time or not, because I was so used to seeing them, but we hadn't had that kind of physical proximity moment yet. Nancy, I should have asked this at the beginning, but what type of services does Kingston Marketing Group offer its clients? And maybe to set the stage, how big are you now? You mentioned you had some growth with employees and so on.
Yeah, so we say we're an end-to-end marketing and communications agency. So we, Katie and I, have very complementary backgrounds. So she kind of grew up through communications, right? So corporate communications, PR, investor relations, employee, you name it, she's done it pretty much. And then I grew up through product and marketing roles, and so we really have found the power in a truly integrated approach in helping companies build, scale, and protect their brands. So we now have 13 full-time employees, and we have a great bench of contractors that we tap into to round out both our skill sets and also add, capacity as we're getting busier and busier. And the way that we operate as a team is we assign project leads to each project, but we assign kind of little SWAT teams that have a variety of disciplinary background so that we can bring a really 360 view and integrated approach to every project. And we get the team together every week in what we call a swarm, and people bring topics in and we kind of pressure test everyone's thinking because a lifelong comms leader is going to look at things through a different lens than a lifelong marketer, P&L owner. And so we find a lot of power in bringing that 360 view to the table for our clients. So it's been a ton of fun, and we do a lot of upfront strategy, brand development, figuring out who you are, what you stand for in the world, what are you promising to your customer, what's the best way to deliver that and communicate that, and helping people when they're at those inflection points, right? Whether they're at a launch moment. We've done a lot of rebranding work, right? A lot of companies are like, let's just get going. Let's get product market fit, and then we'll kind of figure out who we are and what we do. And so we help them really crystallize at those inflection points. We have had, clients that are getting ready to go public. So helping them really prepare from a communications perspective and lay that foundation so that as they are making that big transition, they're ready both internally and externally to communicate that. So, and pretty much everything in between.
I can see what you mean by end to end. Can you give me an example of the type of workshop you're talking about? Maybe like a brand that's trying to be consistent across everything it does, and how you use a workshop to nurture that or come to a decision.
Yeah, so we have one client that is a pet services marketplace. You may be able to guess what it is. They are here in our backyard. And they brought us in originally to help them reposition the brand as they were expanding their lines of service. They were expanding their markets into Europe, had made some acquisitions, and had a little bit of brand soup, right? They had a lot going on. And they also had a copycat competitor who was coming after them and looked like them, felt like them, sounded like them, but didn't have the heart and soul. But the customer was not necessarily seeing the difference. And so we did a series of workshops with them. So we went in, and the first thing we did was get really tight on the mission and ensuring that they had a really strong mission statement, but it meant different things to different people. And so we helped them really workshop around the language behind that. And we have what we call beliefs, right? Which are kind of the ways that you bring your mission to life as a brand and as a company. And so we workshopped around that. And then we did an additional workshop where we identified the core tenets of their brand. So everything tethered, right, to that mission as like the North Star for your organization. But then let's get really tight on who that customer is, what their needs are, how you uniquely serve them. What are the reasons to believe behind that, right? What are the core attributes of your brand that nobody else can claim? And we build that into a framework as a team. And then for this client, we actually took that into research with both sides of the marketplace, both the supply and the demand side, to make sure that it was resonating with customers and with their operators. And then we helped them figure out to roll that out. And we actually did a series of workshops for them at that phase as well, with their product teams, their operations teams, and to help them understand that, brand is not just the job of the marketing team. It is anyone and everyone in the organization, right? And we define brand as the contract you make with your customer. So you're going to have touch points across every function in your organization where your brand is showing up. And so we did a workshop where we brainstormed around those beliefs that we had built out early on and said, let's take a scenario. We had a case study of a product that was being developed and kind of pushed it through that filter. So how would you deliver against each one of these beliefs and your brand promise? And what would that look like? And came up with some really cool product features, some really cool service offerings, and ways of maybe addressing customer needs differently by tethering, all the way back to that mission statement as the anchor point.
That's really cool. And I think for a lot of marketers listening, the idea of the brand not just being marketing assets and the logo and everybody in the organization living and breathing and making decisions based on those brand components. However, sometimes a marketer might go to a certain part of the organization and that part just isn't trained to think in the same way that a marketer does. Do you have any kind of tips and tricks for having a part of the organization that isn't inclined to think brand first to adopt that level of thinking?
Yeah, I think having that tight framework, right? Something that it's a piece of paper, it's one page and it looks really simple. It was probably hundreds of hours of effort and thinking that went into it. I think just explaining to people that brand is more than a logo, right? Brand is that contract you're making with customers, and having them contribute their thoughts on how they, contribute to that in their work. And so, that worked really well with this one client. We had a lot of resistance, and that was why we did that workshop. So it just helped people kind of put themselves in the shoes of the customer. Everyone in a company is in service to a customer, right? And so making sure that they really know and understand that customer is critical. We did something at Starbucks in all of our meetings. We opened with a letter from a customer, or sometimes usually an email, but sometimes actually even a physical letter to just share. Cool. Make sure the voice of that customer is in every room, in every virtual room, in every Zoom call, right? So that they're always reminded that they are here in service to a customer need.
Well, you brought up Zillow and you brought up Starbucks, and I think a lot of the reason why your agency has been so successful in the last 3 years has been drawing from these experiences you've had and your co-founder and your employees have had at other companies. And I want to go back to some of those things. And maybe we can start with Zillow. Zillow's always been fascinating to me by being a leader in data-driven insights. I remember maybe a decade ago, maybe it was longer, Zillow had a chief economist, and that economist certainly evaluated the housing market, but was also on TV and publishing insights that were interesting to all sorts of people. And from where I was sitting was a big part of why Zillow was on the map. What do you think the genesis of that strategy was? Did Zillow fall into it? Was it deliberate? And what was the purpose, and how did it evolve over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Katie, my co-founder, was brought into Zillow when they were probably just 2 or 3 years old. And Zillow, to your point, really was put on the map through that data PR. And so Katie was actually brought in by the founders to build that program. So they knew they had this really rich data set and could build this authority in the housing market as this tiny little startup in Seattle, right? It's just had a lot of eyeballs, but they knew what those eyeballs were looking at. And so they were able to take that proprietary data, and Katie built a really phenomenal team. They, basically had these nuggets of information that made the jobs of reporters really, really easy, right? They had the ability to look at the data, draw out the story from it, and pitch that to reporters in a way that was really high impact. They started doing things like regular reports, right? This all seems really straightforward now, but 10 years ago, this was a really new kind of sliver in the PR and communications world. And so they had these anchor reports, right? That over time, the Zillow report kind of became the fodder, the thing that the reporters and the media were waiting on to come out, and it, in and of itself, would become newsworthy. And then being able to do what we call newsjacking, right? If there are other things happening, other conversations happening, Zillow had the data at their fingertips, and really great spokespeople too, right? Having economists that are good on TV is like a miracle in and of itself, right? So they had a lot to work with, but being able to take that information to reporters to round out the story, or maybe even add a different perspective, and maybe sometimes a contrary perspective, but to show up as that authority based on that proprietary insight that was real time also, which I think is really important if you have a data program. A lot of the economic indicators that are out there are lagging. And so, a lot of companies today through their data have really timely and data that can be directional and in the moment, right? So it's not like, well, 3 months ago, this is what was happening with jobs, or 3 months ago, this is what happened in housing. It's like, today, here's what's happening, in this marketplace. And it can be, leading indicators to future trends.
Well, there's real-time reaction, and Zillow is a master at that. Mm-hmm. And then also there's pre-planning. We do a lot of data-driven press mm-hmm. at Centerfield. And for instance, Black Friday or the holiday shopping season is coming up in 2 to 3 months. How much in advance is a company like Zillow or a client, if they were to ask you, how far in advance are they thinking about the holiday shopping season and doing marketing preparation for that?
Yeah, I mean, it probably depends on the scale and the size and the capabilities within the organization, but I would say 3 months minimum, if not longer. And again, depending on what your data program looks like. I think the key is, if you have those anchor reports, right? Those are like a couple months of work and preparation. Whereas, being able to plan and forecast a little bit and say, what are the questions we're going to be asked? What are the trends we think we might see? How do we start to kind of, think about what stories we might want to tell, and making sure that the internal, the data team is ready, is capable. A lot of companies have really great data, but they don't have a great way to get at it. So that can be a challenge, right? So I think as planful as you can be, and knowing that, we like to build with our clients, 12 or even 18-month calendars, just to say, okay, this is where we're going to have these, if we're doing anchor reports, this is where we're going to, when we're going to release those, here's how long it's going to take to get that data compiled, to analyze it, to, write about it. And then, being able to have those kind of more opportunistic moments slotted in. So I think, again, it depends on what your program looks like, but having that blend of kind of the really reliable rhythm in those kind of anchor reports, I think helps give you the capacity and the freedom to be more reactive when those opportunities come up. So in the example of Black Friday, like probably good to get going, right? And start thinking about even just hypothesizing on, if you don't have data, indicators yet, what we think might happen with consumer behavior based on what we've seen over the last 6 months, and start to map out what those stories could be. So as they're, coming into light, you're ready to kind of pick a lane and go after it.
Absolutely. So if there was a well-known brand in Seattle that was as different as Zillow as possible, I'd probably pick Starbucks. And you mentioned you were there. You mentioned one of the unique things I hadn't heard before about reading a letter or an email from a customer at the beginning of a meeting. Mm-hmm. What was different, if anything, about the Starbucks marketing organization itself? And what did you learn from that? And then also a question about, was Starbucks a specialized or generalized marketing environment and organization? What was it like?
Yeah, it was the polar opposite of Zillow. And my roles were also very different. So at Zillow, I led B2B marketing. And at Starbucks, I was at Starbucks 15 years. So I did pretty much everything across that tenure. I was in product roles and marketing roles. I think what's really the main difference, and what was really jarring for me, frankly, when I left Starbucks, was Starbucks is a very customer-centric organization, and it's more of a traditional brand management function. So we reorged all the time and kind of changed it up. So I sometimes had marketing and products, sometimes just one or the other. But, we were very much a marketing driven culture, because we were so centered around both the customer and the store partner. We called them partners because they're all shareholders, but the partner experience. And those two things were the nucleus of the organization, whether you were in marketing or not. And so, I learned a ton about how to, my whole philosophy around brand really was developed through my time at Starbucks, because we made every decision through the lens of our mission statement, through the lens of the customer experience and the partner experience. It wasn't always, easy. It wasn't always the best for the business. But we really, we're deeply passionate and committed as an organization to that customer experience. And then the other piece was we had a great product and we were all obsessed with coffee, right? So that made it easy, and we had a lot of caffeine. So that made it even better. But, the last role I had there, I was the head of integrated marketing. And so we were accountable for driving transactions and profitability, right? So you can't just give free coffee away and be like, high five, hit our transaction number. So figuring that, out, what are those customer behaviors? What are those seasonal trends? And really getting into and intercepting those moments in people's lives where Starbucks had a really relevant role. And, for some customers, that was their morning routine. For other customers, that was, their place of business. A lot of people work out of Starbucks. Or it was their gathering place, their meeting place. And so really understanding how to be that trusted brand that could fit into their day-to-day. And I think, when I went to Zillow, it was completely different. It was, how do I get real estate agents who aren't, super trusting of Zillow to engage with them and trust them and build their business with them? So it was a completely different muscle. Starbucks, the way that, marketers were developed there was we were leaders first, and we were marketers second. So, could not be more grateful for the just the way I was developed as a leader at Starbucks. It was, where most of my energy went was learning how to really build and coach a team, how to run a P&L, how to, manage up, which is by my last role is half my job, right? Like figuring out how to have the right conversations with the right people and sell things internally. So I think, anyone you meet from Starbucks is likely, a very strong leader. We were definitely generalists, right? Like on any given day, we were digging into the P&L and, approving social media posts, we run the gamut of responsibilities. And I feel like, I'd say my last few years in corporate life, that was starting to change. We were definitely seeing a lot more specialization, right? So it's a really interesting trend that I'm seeing, and I'm curious about where it's going to go. Because people who have gotten really specialized, they're performance marketers, they're brand marketers, they're product marketers. And then they get to this level very quickly where they're a director, they're a VP, and it's hard for them to scale themselves as a leader across a marketing role, into a VP, CMO role, because they haven't had that functional expertise or even practice a lot of times, right, in their past. And so I'm starting to, a lot of our clients, are desperate to hire marketers. They come to us because they don't know where to start, or, they don't know what the right first marketing role in the organization should be. And they're starting to say, where are the generalists? And I'm like, they're really, really hard to find. And so, brand marketing, kind of that traditional brand marketer is really where you're going to find that. But in a city like Seattle, that's so tech heavy, that kind of talent is getting really hard to find. So I'm really curious to see if this pendulum is going to start to swing back more into that more generalist type of practice. It'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, it is interesting because specialization can have can bring all these benefits to a company. I was at Amazon prior to my current role at Centerfield. I really liked Amazon's approach to rotation of encouraging associates to move to a different function or different area every couple of years. And I'd meet someone who was at Amazon for 5 years or 10 years, and they could help navigate me to the Alexa team or to the retail team, or sort of knew where the bodies were buried or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was really, really, I think, an asset for Amazon. I wonder if a lot of organizations either do that or adopt something like that.
Yeah, I think
I'm curious. I'm curious about something. When you started at Starbucks, Starbucks was already successful but didn't have an app. And now, today, I think when I go to Starbucks, I'm almost always paying on the app or ordering in advance. And how, as a marketer, do you insist on or keep brand consistency? And how do you react to something like that that's like a tornado that's changing your retail experience and everything about what you do at a brand like Starbucks?
Yeah, that was a huge adjustment. I mean, just even for me personally, like I have to interact with my barista through my phone now. It was a big transition, and it was pretty scary, frankly, for a lot of the people in the organization. But it was interesting because, again, it all boils down to, for Starbucks, that partner experience and what the baristas are ready for, and how they respond, and how we prepared them for that transition, right? Because they are the face of the brand. And we spent a lot, Starbucks, anything that goes into a store is tested, it's vetted, it's validated to an extreme, maybe too much. But what we found in the early days of mobile order and pay was it actually was freeing up the baristas to have a better interaction with customers. It moved it from the point of sale in the store to the handoff plane, but they were, able to they didn't have that intense pressure. You've been in line at Starbucks, like, it's pretty stressful when you've got 48 people behind you, to have a conversation. But when you're at the other end where people are picking up their coffee, they have that choice of, I can grab it and run, or I can stand here and chit chat for 30 seconds with my barista. So they actually found the quality of that interaction to be improved. But again, we had to kind of go through lots of testing to really, figure out the best way to flow that all through the store. There were lots of fits and starts. I think every once in a while, the mobile ordering gets blamed for certain things that it may or may not be responsible for. But I do think that, across, I started in Starbucks in 2001. So it was like very early days of digital marketing. And I remember when we, were first dipping our toe into the pond of social media, that was even terrifying for Starbucks. But again, we always go back to that brand promise. And, at that time, the promise was moments of connection. So how do you ensure that everything that you do is delivering on that promise? So in the mobile order pay scenario, it's making sure that at that handoff, when you're getting your drink, you're still having that interaction with your barista. It's when you're in social media, and we have, they had a crew of people, right, in social media team, but making sure that they were trained to engage as though they were a barista in the store. That was their mantra. How would a barista handle this conversation? What would that, in-person relationship look like? And how do we emulate that in the social space? We had a really clear, sense of what our brand personality was, what our voice was. So in all of our digital communications, that carried through. I think there were a couple years there where it was a little, fits and starts, and we were learning. And I think, in the several, probably last 3 years or so that I was there, those teams were actually separate, and they came together. And I think that really helped too, because there was like one unified strategy and approach to how Starbucks showed up and maintained that customer relationship in the digital space.
That's a great summation. I love that point about, I didn't realize it till you articulated it. My favorite part at Starbucks is when I'm receiving the thing that I bought and I was about to consume. And so I'm probably unexpected at the beginning, but then capitalizing on that's really, really, really cool. Well, let me ask one more question. So going back one step further, you were at T-Mobile.
Yes.
I don't know, was T-Mobile even branded that at that point? I feel like it was something
It
before that.
was. It was T-Mobile. I joke that I had a little, I broke up with Starbucks and then we got back together. So
Oh, okay.
I did 7 years at Starbucks and then I went to T-Mobile in 2008 to 2010. And then I
Oh,
went back
okay.
to Starbucks. So
Okay.
it actually turned out to be a really great move for my career. So at that time, T-Mobile was part of Deutsche Telekom. And it was in a very much a challenger brand position. You had AT&T, Verizon duking it out for first place and second place, and then Sprint and T-Mobile duking it out, basically bringing up the rear. That was the first time I was in kind of a more traditional marketing role. I had been in product roles up until then. And so it was a lot of fun. I had great leaders. Actually, half of them came from Starbucks. It was kind of hilarious. But they really helped me hone my ability to tap into the customer insight and write a really, really good brief. And, it was, I learned so much through my tenure there. It was a really interesting time because they were still in a fairly risk-averse space. But everyone in the marketing organization could see like this is not the customer experience we want to be delivering. And I think over the last few years, they've had a lot of stuff going on at the corporate level with failed acquisitions and acquisitions that worked and different changes in leadership. But I feel like now what they have done was what we dreamed of doing in those days was like we're in a challenger brand position. We're in a really crappy industry, right? Where the customer experience is terrible. The P&L is dependent on nickeling and diming the customer, right? Like what fee can we get out of the customer? How much can we throttle the network so that we don't have too much cost in the P&L? It was just a really icky business model. But what brand other than T-Mobile was like perfectly positioned to just blow up that business model and turn it on its ear? And I think I was really happy to see over the last few years that they position themselves as the uncarrier, and like they're on a tear right now. And I think that was really, really smart because they saw their customer. They knew that category was just fraught and that there had to be a better customer experience, and they built it. And so obviously they needed the network to go with it and the infrastructure, and that all took a lot of time. But I do think that they're more customer centric today than they were when I was there. But I think, as I've watched them from the sidelines, it's just reinforced for me, like build a product and a service that makes your customer's life better, or where you fit really naturally into their day-to-day, and you'll see success.
And that feels like the pattern that is a through line for your entire career, whether it's in the wireless space or housing or digital, retail, brick and mortar, whatever. Very cool.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a pattern. And I've watched brands struggle with that. And you can see, when brands are really, when they kind of fall apart, that's usually why. There are a lot of brands that run into challenges like Peloton. I know everyone talks about Peloton. I'm part of the Peloton cult. I am a loyal Peloton member. But because they had such a strong emotional connection and commitment to their consumer, they've been able to weather the storm. Their challenges are largely external to their members, right? Like people who have a Peloton or use the app are deeply committed. They've got, supply chain challenges and leadership challenges and all kinds of other things going on. But I tell you, I could work out every day without a Peloton, sure. But will I? No, because I am connected to that brand. I'm super loyal. I love my people, my parasocial relationships with my instructors, my friends who I ride my bike with. And I think, brands that can figure out how to tap into that in the long run will thrive.
Well, as I've traveled, started to travel again, and I'm at the hotel gym, the one part of the gym that is 100% of the time full is the one or two Pelotons in there. So I can definitely see that. Well, Nancy, thanks so much for being here today, and thanks for talking to me.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. It's been fun.